this is a Fox News alert. The recount has not even started in Minnesota, and somehow Al Franken has already shaved off more than 500 votes off of the incumbent lead. That's Norm Coleman. Now, Republican Coleman was up by 725 votes last Wednesday morning, but as of yesterday, that difference has now shrunk to just 206. Coleman's vanishing lead came during a week when Minnesota election officials were required to check their initial results. Under normal practices, both candidates would expect a bump, but these strange circumstances have seen only Franken's vote total swell. Now, the Minneapolis Director of Elections claims to have found 32 absentee ballots hiding in the trunk of her car. All of them conveniently going to Al Franken. Liberal-leaning precincts in Two Harbors, Minnesota, and Partridge Township threw Franken another 346 votes combined, claiming that wrong numbers were initially submitted. Again, Coleman's vote total, it remained unchanged. Plus, Franken's changes are nearly 3 times the gains for Democratic candidates statewide. So the question is the fix in? Joining us now is Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. Governor, as I described that, I'm sorry, no reasonable person can conclude there's not funny business going on here. What is your thoughts on this?
Sean, in the practice of law, there's a phenomenon called disparate impact, which means when something is so out of proportion to what the norm or the trend would be, it at least raises a concern or a suspicion. In Minnesota, we don't have any evidence of wrongdoing, but these patterns that you just described cause us concern, because even if you're in a part of the state that's overwhelmingly Democrat, Norm Coleman should be getting some of the votes, not losing 100% or 90% to Al Franken. So it's cause for concern, for sure. All
right, well, what about 32 absentee ballots all going to Franken, every one of them? You know, does that not concern you? Does that not sound like cheating to you? And why is that being accepted as a vote total?
Well, a couple of things, Sean. First of all, the Secretary of State in Minnesota, not the governor, has the authority over these matters. Minnesota has a reputation for clean and fair and good elections. We got 4,100 precincts run by volunteers. They do a good job, and we thank them. However, these disproportionate patterns are a problem, and finding 32 ballots in the trunk of a car and not, supposedly forgetting that they were there is suspicious. All right,
but we have a problem with the Secretary of State, Mark Ritchie, do we not? He's a liberal partisan Secretary of State. When you look through his record, he has ties to this controversial group we discussed a lot, Acorn. He attended the 2008 Democratic Convention. How much faith and hope and confidence do you have in Ritchie, considering his radical relationships and partisanship, even connected to MoveOn.org?
Well, all Secretary of States are elected, and they have partisan backgrounds of one party or the other. In this case, the final decisions are made by a canvassing board of 5 people. It consists of the Secretary of State plus 4 judges. Those folks were named today. The 4 judges that were named, 2 of them I appointed to the Minnesota Supreme Court. All right. 2 others have good reputations in Minnesota, so I think it's going to be a fair system.
All right, but here's the problem. We did not have a uniform system in terms of the day after Election Day to protect those ballots. So in other words, the different precincts. So in other words, my fear is that the fix may already be in, and during the recount we're going to discover, oh, there's another 500 votes for Franken. When you look at these change votes so far, Governor, we see that, for example, the Senate gains for Franken were 2.5 times that than the gain for Barack Obama. And Barack Obama way outperformed Franken in the state of Minnesota. 2.9 times the total of the Democrats across the congressional races, and 5 times the net loss that Democrats suffered for all state house races. So he's outperforming every single solitary measure. So I'm asking, Governor, I guess my question is honest. Do you suspect there's been cheating going on?
Sean, we don't have any direct evidence of that, and when you make an allegation, not you, but anybody, of fraud in an election, it's a very serious matter, so you got to have specific evidence to back it up. What we do know is the statistics that you're citing and the patterns that you're citing are suspicious. They seem to defy probability theory. They seem to defy common sense. Even in an overwhelmingly Democratic area, Norm Coleman would be getting some of those votes, 20, 30, 40%. That's not happening, so it raises a red flag.
Hey, Governor, it's Alan. Welcome back to our show. The 32 votes.
Alan, good to see you. And by the way, when you when you see your wife, tell her that I said thank you for staying with you.
I'm not quite sure what that means. Maybe just trying to get her vote in 2012. I don't know, sir, but in any event...
Hey, Governor, you just earned yourself the line of the year. That was good.
Believe me, I'll thank her a lot more than you will. But let me ask you this. 32 votes found in a car. If they wanted to steal this thing, wouldn't they make it 332 votes? 1,032 votes? They can do better than 32, can't they?
What are you, Sherlock Holmes now?
You're very funny, sir.
Yes, yeah.
That's good.
I mean, you know, you could steal more than 32 in a situation like that, right?
Well, in Minnesota, we have a very sophisticated system. It's all electronic scanned ballots, and so it's hard to stuff the ballot box. But seriously, Alan, even you would have to admit, if your job was to transmit ballots from the precinct to the county or the county to the state, you wouldn't throw them in your trunk and then, you know, forget about them. There's something strange about that.
Who put them in there? How do you think it got there? I mean, shouldn't all those votes be counted? Shouldn't every vote be counted?
Not the cheating.
I understand me. Let the governor answer. Go ahead, Governor.
This election officer said, well, they threw him in there, and at no point was his or her car outside of their supervision, and so nobody could have broken into the trunk, blah, blah, blah. But it seems fairly clear that that's an act that should not have happened, to have those ballots in somebody's trunk of somebody's car.
You know, in terms of complaints about Mark Ritchie, Democratic Secretary of State, with certain ties, what about in 2000? I didn't hear you complain about Catherine Harris with ties to the governor, who happened to be the brother of the candidate for whom all those votes in Florida were going.
Alan, I want to be clear about this. I know Mark Ritchie. He is a partisan on the other side of the aisle, as I am as governor. He is trying his best, I think, to conduct this fairly. The laws in Minnesota have certain limitations around them. There's no evidence that he or anyone else has had actual wrongdoing. What we're saying is this process has resulted in some strange irregularities, statistical irregularities, and it is some suggestion that perhaps something's amiss.
All right, Governor, I'm going to ask my wife your question. Thanks very much for being with us.
That was a great line, Governor.
Coming up next, more in the Minnesota Senate race as they prepare for next week's recount. Both campaigns are assembling a team of lawyers as the margin of votes keeps Minnesota Secretary of State Mark Ritchie formed a board today consisting of county judges and justices to help him determine whether Republican Norm Coleman or Democrat Al Franken won Minnesota's Senate race. Coleman's campaign is demanding it get an accurate account of the whereabouts of the 32 ballots found in an election official's car.
I would have hoped, frankly, that the Franken campaign would have liked to have gotten to the bottom of the issue, too. They decided to oppose it. What we got was a representation from the Minneapolis city attorney herself that these ballots had not been tampered with, that they'd been in the continued possession of this individual, but they had just happened to be driving around with her, apparently, for 2 or 3 days. That's going to have to do for now, and that representation is certainly something, but it's not what I would have preferred.
Meanwhile, Franken's team says this is just another instance in which Coleman is trying to prevent all votes from being counted.
Let's not forget, Norm Coleman himself came out the day after the election and already tried to short-circuit the process. Even before the canvass had begun, Norm Coleman wanted to prevent further votes wanted to prevent all the votes from being counted. So I think what we have here is a disturbing pattern that we're likely to see, unfortunately, I think, play out throughout this recount.
Joining us now, former Senator and Fox News contributor Rick Santorum, former Gephardt campaign manager Steve Murphy, and the editor of RedState.com, Eric Erickson. Eric, let me begin with you.